All right, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Today, I'm going to give you guys some tips on how to do double exposures on film. Yes, double exposures on film. Yes. Yes. Lighting's good, but I'm not good. Hey, what's up, guys? I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to give you guys some tips on doing double exposures on film. All right, so double exposure photography. In the film world, it's a very popular skill to have. It's artistic, it's fun to do, and it gives a big oomph to all of your pictures, especially if executed right. Now, technically, when it comes to your own work, there's no right or wrong way of doing things. But it doesn't hurt to get some tips from other photographers or other artists just to like fine tune your skill set, right? So I'm here to give you guys some tips on doing double exposures. Before we go any further, please keep in mind that technically you can do multiple exposures or more than 2 exposures on a single frame. I'm just talking more in depth about double exposures since it's easier to grasp without having to talk about anything else extra, especially those of you who are first trying out the multiple or double exposure photography. Okay, cool. Basically, a double exposure in photography terms is exposing the same frame twice with 2 images. Okay, so remember that. It's pretty cool because it gives photographers a more creative edge when it comes to their composition. I know whenever I get in a creative rut, I'll always fall back on doing a double exposure because it looks cool and it's extremely fun to do. Now, it might be a confusing concept to grasp at first. I know I was very confused at first, but just think about in simple terms, just getting 2 separate images and just combining them as one. Okay, so you'll have like these little silhouettes everywhere. It depends on your composition and how you frame that whole image or those 2 images together to make them, intertwine with each other. It's really cool. I highly recommend doing it because again, it gives you like a more artistic edge when it comes to your composition. So yeah, let's talk about the cameras. When it comes to the camera, you're going to want to make sure that the camera has a multiple exposure feature. I know that the Canon A1 has a multiple exposure feature. It's this, where is it? Oh, there's like a little switch right here that you would press up. Another camera that actually has a double exposure or multiple exposure feature is the Mamiya RZ67. It has a little switch right here. Where you switch it to M for multiple exposures, so that's pretty cool, especially if you're looking for a medium format camera that has it. I also have, this camera, the Zenza Bronica ETR-SI, has a multiple exposure feature. There are many other cameras that have that feature. You just got to make sure that it has it. So there are some workarounds if the camera does not have a multiple exposure feature. Like for instance, and I think this method only works for 35mm format cameras. When you're using an SLR, what you do want to do is use up that whole film roll and just take silhouettes of stuff, and then you'd want to rewind the film, but just be careful not to rewind the film all the way into the canister, and you'd want to take normal exposed pictures that second run through. A lot of people have done that in the internet and it produced great results. The only thing with that method is that it's a little bit tricky because you never know if the frames are going to align exactly. So just keep that in mind, okay? All right, so now that you have your cameras in mind, let's talk about the film. When it comes to film, you're going to want to remember that you're overexposing your images, okay? So when you're picking your film stocks, you're gonna wanna make sure that the film you're getting handles overexposure really well. So I would suggest picking any black and white or color negative film. I know slide film or infrared film don't really handle over or underexposure really well, so I'd stick with any black and white or color negatives, okay? Some suggestions of film that I would pick are Kodak Tri-X 400 or Ilford HP5 Plus 400 film. The reason why I suggest these two films is because these two black and white film negatives handle overexposure really well. I would honestly pick black and white over color because in black and white it's easier to contrast things out, especially when it comes to post-production, okay? As far as color negatives, I would highly suggest picking Kodak's Portra 400. I know it's a bit expensive right now, especially since Kodak jacked up their prices, I think 30% since the beginning of the year, which is ridiculous, but reality is we're not stopping ourselves from buying it because that's how good this film is. Anyways, the result you get with Portra 400 in terms of overexposure are really, really, really good. This film is just a great all-around film, so I highly suggest using Portra 400 if you want to do color negatives, okay? Now that you've picked your film, let's talk about metering. All right, so when it comes to metering, you gotta keep in mind that you're overexposing your images, okay? When you're exposing for 2 frames, generally the rule of thumb is to double the ISO so that you have a properly exposed image when you're combining the two. For an example, let's say that you're shooting with a 400 ISO speed film, okay? What you're gonna wanna do is on your camera settings or your light meter, whichever you're using, to meter, you're gonna want to change the ISO to 800 instead of 400. So that way, when you combine your 2 images together, you're gonna have an accurately and evenly exposed image instead of overexposing it, if that makes sense. But, yes, there are always buts, okay? You can actually get away with shooting at box speed. Remember, like I said before, when talking about the film stock, so you guys are choosing that when you're choosing your film, you're gonna wanna pick a film stock that handles overexposure really well. Like I said, you could actually get away with shooting at box speed and the results will turn out just fine. Honestly, that's how I normally shoot my double exposures, and 99% of the time it comes out just the way I imagined it in my head. To give you guys an example of what I usually do whenever I meter for double exposures is for the first image that I shoot, I always meter for the highlights, so I'll point my light meter up at the sky. That way my subject will be silhouetted and the silhouette will keep information for the next image that I shoot. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's very important, especially when it comes to your composition, like I said earlier. So now when I meter for the second image, what I usually do is an average metering of the whole scene, or I will meter for the shadows. So that way, the highlights on that second image will fill up the silhouette from the first image, and it usually comes out really good. All right, that's pretty much it on double exposures. You can actually go further in post-production and isolate your subject in your images, which is pretty cool. Come on, I'll actually show you my methods on how I do that. Let's go. I usually use Adobe Lightroom to edit my photos, and feel free to use any other photo editor that you guys have, as I'm sure that the techniques that I'm about to show you guys will generally apply the same way in whatever other tool you guys have, okay? So, all right, let's get started. Here's the photo that I have right here. And what I'll usually do first is mess with the contrast. I usually like to start by increasing the contrast, so you see that the subject in the middle right here starts to pop out a little bit more, and especially with the other details inside that image, okay? And the next thing that I'll do is look at the colors and see if I want to change anything inside it. I'm actually satisfied with the way it looks right now. The highlights and shadows are great. So now the most important thing to isolate your subject is grab the brush tool, make sure everything is set to default. Now you're going to want to go down to the saturation, okay, and bump that slider all the way down. Now you have your little brush, and make sure that the brush that you have, it's fairly sized. I usually go about this big, and make sure the feather is set between anywhere from 60 to 90. I usually go about 85. That way it doesn't look too harsh on the edges, okay? And let's start now. So the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to convert things to black and white, so that way it's easier to mask out. And I'm pretty sure there are other easier ways to do this, but this way I found excuse me, easier suits me. So you just want to shade out anything that you don't want in the image, okay? So now you have your black and whites over there. Now what you're going to want to do is just overexpose it and everything will go away, okay? You could increase the highlights too. What else? If you see these little spots right here, I'll usually bump up the dehaze so it takes away those spots. And I actually marked away more than I wanted. Excuse me, my throat is really dry right now. Embarrassing. So I'll actually hit the erase button to erase away part of the mask, and I'll just go up here. Okay. I'll leave more of this, and I actually want to show more of this bush right here. Feel free to edit the size of your brush so that way it looks a little bit better. Okay, and there you guys have it. That's the way I do it. It looks nice, it looks neat, it's very artistic. It's not that hard to do. So please keep trying, keep at it. Double exposures are a great way to bump up your artistic styles or your composition, especially when you're stuck in a rut. Okay, well, if you guys like this video, subscribe and like. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I love you all. I love all of you guys. Okay, peace.